the system. We now have an hour to grill our two candidates and to hear what they think about the issues which you're most concerned about. I've got a whole list of things that people have sent in. I'll try and do it in some sort of order, but we're going to start by having both the candidates tell us in 5 minutes, without deviation, repetition, or anything else untoward, why they believe they're the right person to be leader. A coin was tossed some time ago, and it's Ed's turn to go first. Ed.
Well, thank you, Dick, and it's good to be back in Yorkshire in the Humber. Thank you for your patience tonight. Friends, these are challenging times with the worst recession for 300 years, COVID, Brexit, the climate emergency. Our economy is being hit hard with significant job losses already in different sectors across your region. So Liberal Democrats must now campaign hard on jobs and the economy if voters are to see us as relevant. And I think I'm best placed to help you win those campaigns with both vision and experience. Take the economy and climate. Too often they've been separated. My Green Economy Recovery Plan brings them together to invest in green homes, green transport, green energy, with a green jobs guarantee. I can deliver this green vision because I've experienced doing it before. I fought the Tories on climate and won. My work in government more than trebled the UK's renewable power. Thanks to us, Britain is the world leader in offshore wind. One of my proudest achievements was to get Siemens to invest in Hull with a new factory manufacturing turbine blades for North Sea wind farms. 1,000 green jobs. For our children's futures, I want us to campaign to turn Yorkshire and Humber's economy green. But a future greener economy must also be fairer. From my work on a universal basic income, when I was Paddy Ashdown's economics advisor, to helping devise policies like a penny on income tax for education, I've always argued for progressive ideas to build a fairer society. But post-COVID, let's also campaign on caring. The UK has almost 10 million carers, 3 times as many people who voted for us in the last election. Let's be the voice of carers. My own caring experience started as a young carer. Dad died when I was 4, so when Mum became terminally ill when I was 12, I nursed her for 3 years till she died. Now Emily and I care for our children, including my disabled son John, who needs 24/7 care. So I understand what so many carers go through every day. My life experience helps me relate to people, to voters, to their challenges. In the general election review, you see our party's challenges, and there are many. And the conclusion, there are no quick fixes. And the review's sharpest criticism, that people don't know what voting Liberal Democrat means. My vision in this leadership campaign begins to answer that. A greener economy, a fairer society, a more caring country. Friends, I believe we can win. I get quality media cut through, like after forcing a commitment from Boris Johnson for an independent inquiry into COVID, a record number of hits on our video. And I'm an experienced campaigner. I'm the only MP in our party's history to win without being a target seat. I know how to win. Colleagues, we need to win for our liberal values, our liberal ideas, for that greener economy, that fairer society, that more caring country. So please back many campaigners from across the country. Back me to win, to lead this party. There are great times ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. Layla?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dick. Thank you to you all. And I'll start by saying Eid Mubarak to all of those who are celebrating Eid al-Adha today. I've been thinking of those all day who've been disrupted by the government announcement. I can only hope that for some, that Leeds being promoted makes up for it just a little bit. Now, some of you watching may well have already voted for our next leader, but if you haven't, then I urge you to seize this moment to change our party. And I'm asking for your vote so that we can move our party and our country forward together. Because let's be honest, we're languishing at 6% in the polls, and our council base has halved in the last 10 years. We have to turn this around. With a more of the same approach, the Lib Dems risk becoming invisible at a time when the UK needs a strong liberal voice. But this predicament provides an opportunity, and I find it motivating. We need a leader that can win back trust and credibility among our electorate by communicating progressive vision that appeals to a broad base of moderate voters. There is a place for bold liberal ideas in this country. And I know this because since the December election, I've been listening, and that's where we need to start. I travelled to talk to voters in Leeds and Sheffield, but also Wales, Devon and Cornwall and Kent, and I've since held listening sessions with over 300 local parties. My vision for the country is well informed, and it's underpinned by a very liberal principle that everyone should have an equal opportunity to thrive and the security to live life in the way that they choose. Under my leadership, I'd encourage a renewed Liberal Democrat Party to campaign on policies that actually matter to people in their homes, but that also work for regional and national campaigns. I'm talking about advocating a reformed approach to lifelong learning, to broaden the curriculum, to get children world ready, not just exam ready, to give the environmental crisis the attention it needs by committing to a carbon negative, not just neutral society, rebuilding local economies through the support of small businesses and offering retraining for people to work in new green industries, and providing a universal basic income, so ably led by our campaigners in both Hull and Sheffield, so that no one gets left behind. Education, the environment, and the economy. By offering solutions that improve people's lives in the areas that they care about, we will speak to a broad base of voters and communities again. Because as leader, what I need to do is to turn the prose of our party into poetry, to communicate our incredible policies to voters. And I've proven throughout this campaign that I can get the media cut through to move progressive ideas forward. Nationally, I've appeared on 6 front pages, but we also need to focus on local papers too. Just today, I was in the Yorkshire Post talking about the lack of affordable housing in northern cities. We need to broadcast a relevant message, a progressive message, a liberal message, similar to the days when Paddy and Charles led the party. It's what I did in my own constituency. I built a plan and a vision which gained support from both moderate Conservatives as well as those on the centre left. The result was we overturned a 10,000 Tory majority in one go. And we do this by taking the fight to both Labour and the Tories locally, where they are letting their communities down, council seat by council seat. That's what leads eventually to Westminster success. So in this leadership election, I'm the candidate who can move us on from the last decade, rebuild trust, and power the Liberal Democrat political comeback. Vote for me and vote for change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commendably brief. What I'd like to do in terms of the questions, I'll try and do them in what seems to me to be some kind of relevant order. The first question is going to be about the region, and then we're going to go on to more general questions, of which there are very many. So my first question, which comes from James, and which was submitted almost in the same terms by Wayne, reads as follows. The Yorkshire and Humber region has a similar population and GDP as Scotland, more than that of Wales, but we do not have as much control over services and the economy. Do you support providing the Yorkshire region with a devolved parliament or assembly? Ed?
Well, yes, I do. But I do think the party needs to have a very big debate about this. And I support the idea of a commission to look at both how we deal with the threat from the Tories about unitary government, and also how we get a federal Britain and what that means for government in England. I was involved in the campaigns back in 2004 when there was a regional assembly proposal in the northeast and Yorkshire, and it didn't go well, as you know. But I think we need to turn that around. And the question I would want to debate with people from Yorkshire and the Humber region is, what do you think about the sort of city mayors that you've got at the moment, whether it's sort of Dan Jarvis in South Yorkshire and the Sheffield City region and the proposals in West Yorkshire? You know, what is it that we need to go beyond that? You know, to me, the attraction of assembly in Yorkshire has always seemed really huge. So we can really, as you say, ensure that Yorkshire is able to control so much of its own, and on the transport, on the economy, on the health service. Now, Yorkshire is a huge county. It's also, if you compare it to the rest of the EU, I think it's about the 10th largest country in the EU. So, you know, we do need to be radical when we talk about decentralisation and devolution. We've got to look at the facts. And, you know, Yorkshire looks to me like almost perfect for regional devolution. But the party leader has to engage with the region. I don't know what your ideas are, whoever asks this question, but I do think as a party, we need to get a grips with this. I think we've not really been clear enough in recent times. And that's why I think I do support a commission to settle this down, but I couldn't be more committed to devolution.
Thanks, Leila.
Well, I too absolutely support devolution, but let's start with the principle about why, right? So we are liberals, and fundamentally what we believe is that we need to be distributing power away from the centre, so it's closer to the people who those decisions, that power and the decisions that those people make are as close to possible to the people that those decisions affect. And that's the basic principle. That's why we're a bottom-up party. That's why we believe in localism. That's why we believe in federalism. And there is a motion that's coming to conference in September that I very much hope passes, and that's where this commission comes in, because whilst Wales and Scotland, and it's very important, I think, that we do adopt this, but they recognise in order to be properly federalist, we have to understand how devolution is going to work in England. And it all comes down to that sense of, that strong sense of identity. You know, people grow up in Yorkshire and Humber feeling proud of where they come from, feeling like they want that identity that's recognised in the power structures that they've got. And yet, that's not what's happening under the Tory government. In fact, we are seeing increased centralisation rather than the other way around. And the same goes for Labour, who continuously talk the good talk about fighting inequality. But what they've never understood is that the best way of dealing with these kinds of inequalities is actually to give power to local authorities, to devolved parliaments, to whatever situation that we end up in. And I really look forward as leader to putting my political weight behind this commission so that we can have that conversation. But I'll also say, Dick, to also Jane and Wayne, one of the things that I struggle with is that while on the one hand, there is broad agreement about this as a principle as a party, you know, we are bottom up and not top down. And yet in our campaigning, we don't live those values. And I know there are questions around structure coming up soon and strategy, but linked to this, I would like us to change as a party so that we were much more decentralized in campaigning decisions too. So by having a broad progressive agenda set by the leader, but that is done very carefully in consultation with local campaigners on the ground, we can then have a campaigning message that works for people on the ground, rather than what we had at the last election, which is the leader and HQ were sending out messages that simply didn't work for you and your residents. We cannot have that again. So let's live our values, both in terms of our broad political aims at a national level, but also within our own party.
Thanks very much. Now, moving on to some of those broader issues. The first question, which I'll put to Leila so that we're not going Ed, Leila, Ed, Leila, Ed, Leila all the time, is on party strategy, and comes from Jerry, who says, the Thornhill Review emphasise the need for clear strategy for the party. The basic requirements of a strategy are clarity of purpose and objectives, clarity about who the party seems to appeal to and what distinctive message. None of these are clear to me. So what should we seek to be? An influential niche party, a protest party, a pressure group, coalition party, a party of government, or what? Layla.
Thank you, Jerry. Well, this, I loved reading this section in the general election review because it absolutely matched the diagnosis that was coming from voters themselves when I went to talk to them across the country. And they said, we just don't know what you're for. And when I would then tease into, well, why is that? You know, there were two things that came back really strongly. One was that in some parts, particularly in Labour-facing areas, particularly with younger voters, they'd felt that we'd lost their trust. And then in Tory-facing areas in particular, that revoke policy, that very top-down policy, the one that goes counter to our bottom-up way of working, again, felt like that we didn't know who we were. And so that's what we now need to recapture, is understanding what liberalism is and discovering, again, how to connect with those voters. And it all starts with listening. If we're going to get this right, we have to appreciate that we have not been getting it right and that we need to change. So it starts by having a continuous period of listening to voters, particularly over the first year of whoever becomes leader of the party. Hopefully, we will then be able to send that signal to people that we've moved on from the last 10 years. And in terms of how we change how we campaign and how we do that, I am adamant. It's how we did this in Oxford, West and Abingdon. We didn't win it by accident. It was a strategy that we employed actually over 5 years where we built from the ground up. And it was about making sure that local parties have the training that they need, have the support that they need. We need to make sure that we've got strong regional campaigners that are feeding into HQ. I've already said that as leader, I want a specific person in my office whose job it is to make sure that we're listening to campaigners on the ground and that we rebuild council seat by council seat. Because what we have as a real challenge is, yes, at the next Westminster election, predominantly the seats that we are looking to win, where we are second, are Tory facing. And that's really important to make sure that we win those. But I don't want to be leader just for one general election. I've got my eye already to the one after that. And actually those seats and those council seats that we need to win, particularly in Yorkshire and Humber, many of them are Labour facing. So that message that we need to develop needs to be broad enough to appeal to all sides. And we do that by listening and not deciding too quickly. So when I say education, the environment and the economy, that's where I've got to now. The general election review itself makes the point that what is going to be that issue that really captures people? Well, actually, that's going to be up to you guys as local campaigners to decide for May elections next year in particular. But let's not decide too soon for the next general election. We should be doing that about 18 months to 2 years before, and then we start hammering those message home with real message discipline. So it is an approach that builds on where we are as a party now. And then if we do it in the right way, that will build strength for the future, come what may. I want to see a Liberal Democrat government one day. But I'm not convinced that at the next election, it is the right thing to do to be standing up and saying that I'm about to be the next Prime Minister. That is not going to help win us any credibility back. So let's build from the ground up with ambition as quickly as possible, but moving forwards and not backwards, which is sadly what's been happening over the last 10 years.
Okay.
To answer the question, I want us to be in power. I want us to be in power in council chambers and town halls across the country. I want us to be in power in some form in government, because that's the only way we change people's lives. You know, you can be in opposition if you like, but I don't think that's how you really make sure the Liberal policies and priorities get put in place. And I've been really worried that for a little while now, we've been talking to ourselves. We've sounded like a think tank. Worst of all, we sound like a think tank that's London-centric, that's middle class, that's just talking to ourselves. I want us to be a party that is reaching out and that talks to the voters across the country, in every region and nation of our country, that's talking about the issues that we know people care about. We know they care about jobs and the economy, of course they do. And look at the mess. We have to have a message for that. I don't think you have to do much listening for that. We know they need investment in public services. Look what's happening in our schools and our health service. We know the unfairness in our society. And people want to know what we're going to do about it. And we know that the NHS and care system have failed. We've seen it in COVID. And we've seen that the care system has so often been forgotten by the Tories and the Labour Party. I won't let that happen. The question is how you're going to get into power. You've got to have a strong message. So that's why I'm talking about a greener economy, a fairer society, a more caring country. I couldn't be clearer about the sense of direction that I'd want to take us on the step to power, the clear message. And you either like that or you don't. I hope you'll like it. And as we get nearer the election, of course, we'll get more precise about the exact policies and we'll debate them. But I think if we're not about a greener economy, a fairer society, a more caring country, who are we as Liberal Democrats? So I want to give that strong lead. I'm passionate about those issues, so that's why I've put them forward before you. And I think I bring to that clear vision some experience. What's happened in the past is the party has gone all over the place. You know, media for media's sake doesn't work. You need message discipline. And when I've worked with leaders who've been successful, and I've worked with a number, it's their message discipline that has counted. Because what they've done is they've fostered a brand, an image for the party. And if you talk about everything, you talk about nothing. Because people just don't hear us. Because we don't, you know, whoever is a leader, you won't get on TV that much. And those nanoseconds, they're so precious. You've got to tell the Liberal Democrat story. You've got to be consistent and clear and robust and disciplined. And the experience I bring to this job is what teaches me that that's what I do. And that's what I get the team to do. And by having that clear vision, we can get to power in local government and in national government. Not me being Prime Minister, of course, I think that was a big mistake. But I want to get rid of this Conservative government. And whether we're in opposition with some sort of arrangement or whether we're in government with some other progressive parties, who knows? I can't tell yet. But I do want to get into power because I know that's where you make the difference and change people's lives.
Thanks very much. Well, that's all very well. But the question is, in the first past the post, winning seats. So I've had several questions on the same theme, and I'm going back to Ed to start on this. This is it starts off with David. A recent report from UK in a Changing Europe has suggested that the Lib Dems need to adopt a yellow halo strategy, i.e. to concentrate on the seats around London, in order to gain seats in Westminster. What message would implementing that approach send to party members outside of the halo? Backing that up, Nicholas says, how do you propose to improve the party's standing in the left behind constituencies? And Jack says, how will you appeal to the former mill towns here in Yorkshire? So how are we going to win seats and yet appeal to people, frankly, in a lot of seats, where at the moment we're a very, very long way from being a contender? Ed.
Well, David, Nicholas and Jack, when I won my seat in 1997, we were 106 on the target list, and we just won 47 in that election. I'm the only MP in our party's history to win a seat that wasn't targeted. And in the next election, I took a majority of 56 to 15,676, the biggest absolute terms majority achieved at general election. And I didn't win a seat that had previously been won. I won a new seat. And I want to bring that campaigning experience of winning in unexpected places to the whole of the party. And you know, one of the reasons I won, probably the most important one, was that we'd won in local government first. So if you're serious about bottom-up politics, and I really am, I'm a liberal localist to my core, devolving power across our party, across our country. If you're doing that, you want to get behind those local government campaigns in every village, town, city, county, region of our country over the next few years. And the reason why, you know, I read reports like the halo effect, I've seen that, David. I don't accept it. It's one of these classic academics reports that, you know, are very static, look at the last election results and assume that's what's going to happen next time. No. Politics is far more fluid than that, in my experience. You can win seats you don't expect to, but you only win them if you've done that campaigning over a period of time. So, you know, Nicholas talks about those left behind seats. There won't be any. You know, I want to encourage everyone to campaign. I want to see every ward being fought with a Liberal Democrat candidate. Now, you know, we won't make progress in every place, of course. And when it comes to elections, we will have to target. I'm not going to pretend we can target everywhere. But I do think we can encourage campaigners across the country, wherever. Show what you're made of. Show what you can do. Show how you can win against Labour, against Tories, against whoever. And then let's back success. And we can win in some surprising places, because we have got some great campaigners in seats that, you know, at the moment we're nowhere, but with those skills, with that determination, we can go through, just like I did in Kingston and Surbiton, winning a seat we'd never won before. And the mill towns, Jack, you know what? I don't know, but I'll tell you what I will do. I'll come to your area, your mill towns. I'll work with your local party. We'll devise a campaign. I love devising campaigns. I've done it so often, over 30 years in the party, 20 years in Parliament. I want to bring that experience of helping people develop those campaigns so they can win in areas that people have written us off. And, you know, in those mill towns, I bet there are issues about investing in public services. I bet there are issues about jobs, and the green jobs message would be exciting. I bet there are issues about social justice. So just invite me, and happy to work with you and get our campaigners to give you the training, give you the ideas so you can win wherever you are.
Thanks, Ed. Layla.
Thank you all for your questions, and they are actually key to what we now need to do together as a party. And it starts by recognising that, yes, there are a lot of obvious target seats at the next general election in and around London and the home counties, but we have to build for the long term across the whole country. And my job as leader is to give a broad message across the national level, you know, like Charles Kennedy did, that helped us win in places like Leeds and Sheffield and Hull. But you also have an important role as leader. The General Election Review spoke about the three-legged stool, and this absolutely has to be done in concert with not just the president and the CEO, but also the regions and local parties themselves, to build the party structures up so that we can do this everywhere. And as part of this leadership contest, I've released a 5-point plan that I think we need to adopt as a party. And it starts, first of all, with living our own values. I spoke about this earlier, you know, bottom-up campaigning, not just top-down. So if you are a local party that is wanting to try something new, it encourages innovation, that we will listen to you. We're not going to dismiss it and say, oh no, we tried that 10 years ago, it doesn't work. There's so many different ways that we need to be campaigning now, and encouraging people to be their best activist self is a huge part of how we won in Oxford, West and Abingdon, and that's what we need to now replicate. We also need to listen to voters. I will instruct HQ as part of the first year in particular of me being leader to engage in this exercise, but it needs to be driven again from the bottom up. Activists like you need to be involved. And we then campaign seat by seat at a council level on things that people really care about, because what does that do? It rebuilds credibility. It rebuilds our relevance as a party, because if you vote Lib Dem, you then get Lib Dems, and Lib Dems get stuff done, just as they do in the councils that we hold in York, for example, just as we do in opposition in places like Hull. We absolutely get stuff done for our local residents, and people will recognise that and vote Lib Dem. We then need to build a core message around that. And I spoke earlier about education, the environment, and the economy, but at its core is a bold, progressive vision that we are building, and it's building that core vote. And finally, I do think that there is a place for cooperation in politics, because I came back to that relevance point. We are the fourth party in Parliament, certainly in the Commons anyway. How do we get stuff done without cooperating with all sides of the House? So, for example, at the moment, I'm leading the inquiry on coronavirus as part of an all-party group. We've got backbenchers from all parties on that. And that shows people that we are relevant to them right now. So let's empower activists, let's give them the training, let's, where it's appropriate, cooperate with other parties. In those seats that are Tory facing, perhaps we could even do more than that, just as we did in Oxford, West and Abingdon, get them out campaigning for us. That's what I did here, but I recognise that's not going to work everywhere. So it's a clear plan, it makes sense in the long term, and it's one that I know we can do because we've done this as a party before.
Thanks, Leila. You've partly anticipated the next question I was going to ask you, which came from Steve, which is about electoral cooperation between parties, because all party groups and cooperation in Parliament are one thing. Yeah. But the question really, I think in a lot of people's minds is making sure that we don't have a Tory party as the majority government after the next election our main aim as a party, our strategic aim at the next election. And how far, therefore, are we prepared to go in cooperating with other parties in order to achieve that? So how far do you think we ought to be prepared to go to achieve that?
Thank you. Look, getting Boris Johnson out of power is absolutely critical, not just for us, but actually for the country. Look at the mess he's creating. Look what he's done just in the last 24 hours, messing up people's lives at the drop of a hat, because him and the people around him have not got a grips on coronavirus, and it's having a real effect on people on the ground today. So we absolutely need to get Boris Johnson and the Tories out. I've also said that there is no way that I will look at doing any kind of deal with them at the next election. We can rule that out. Where we have seats like Oxford, West and Abingdon, where we are second to the Tories, where it's very obvious that we set ourselves up as the main contender to the Conservatives, our job at that point is, I think, to do two things. One is to make sure that we build a progressive alliance of not just voters, but ideally even activists, to then increase the size of our campaigning forces so that we can take the fight to the Tory government and bring on board those soft Conservatives that we need in those seats. What we did here is I got the Greens to stand aside. They actually then started campaigning with us. That sent a signal to both Labour Party activists and even some Tory activists. I had behind the scenes, a Tory councillor who was so upset with where the Tories were going that he started actually delivering leaflets for us. It's about creating a campaign force with a sense of purpose to get rid of the Tories in those seats. And that helps us to achieve that aim of getting rid of Boris Johnson. But I did have a problem with the way that Unite to Remain worked. It was very top down. It meant that so many local parties felt they weren't part of the process and they felt demoralized after it. I think if we're going to achieve that kind of cooperation, it needs to be on the ground, bottom up, just as we did here. And I'd be looking to roll that out. But that should not stop us from taking the fight in places where we are fighting Labour to make sure that we are holding Labour councils and indeed bad MPs to account as well. The two will go hand in hand because we will have a distinct liberal message to sell to people, a message that they really can buy into, believe in, is distinct compared to Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. Where is the distinctiveness of our party? That's what we need to rediscover. And that is how you then build in the medium and the long term. I don't think it's an either or. I think we can maximize our gains against the Tories in the way that I've described, while also having a message that's broad enough and a campaign structure that's broad enough and local enough that in those seats that are Labour facing, we can also make progress. Not one, but both.
Thanks very much. Ed?
I desperately want to get rid of Boris Johnson and his cabal. They are ruining our country. They're making the more vulnerable even more vulnerable. And their shambolic handling of COVID and their Brexit agenda means they have to go. So I've ruled out coalition, supply and confidence, any arrangements with the Tories. I fought the Tories all my life here, and I want to get a progressive government and the Tories out. The question then is, how do you do that? And essentially there's two options. You either have some sort of formal arrangement, a pact and a deal, some of the things that Labour was talking about that she's done in her constituency, or you have an understanding, more informal arrangement. I prefer the latter for several reasons. First of all, I don't think formal pacts or deals work very well. I thought Unite to Remain wasn't very good. But also, if you look at the second preferences of many of our voters, they would vote Tory. And this idea you can just put our votes and Labour together is just nonsense. It doesn't actually fit the facts. And if you've canvassed as long as I have over 30 years, you just know that that just doesn't work. And, you know, when I was working tactical voting 87 in Oxford, when I was working ahead of the 97 election with Paddy, it was really clear that to get tactical voting to work for the progressive side of politics, you need to be a little bit more under the radar. You do need to fight Labour in Labour areas. You know, we ring fence them. There should be no doubt about that. There are some awful Labour councillors, some awful Labour MPs. We should be willing and clear that we'll take them on. But in the seats that we know that Labour are the only ones who can beat the Tories, already in many parts of the country, we don't fight them, do we? And we want to make sure that they don't fight us in areas where we are the challengers to the Tories. But that is best done through an understanding. And I worked with Paddy Ashdown for a number of years as his economics advisor as he developed that understanding informally with Tony Blair. It was very skilled choreography. And I want to draw on my experience of watching that to help us develop that with Keir Starmer, assuming that Keir Starmer does turn out to be the Labour leader who is far more electable than the Corbyns and Miliband's and Kinnocks that we've seen in the past. I'm excited by this. I'm excited because we can grow as a party. We can take Labour on under this deal in areas where we want to take them on, but we can win those parliamentary seats. Now, that's why I won by just 56 votes, by not being a target seat in 97, because of tactical voting. So I've seen it work for the party. I know how you do it. And that is how I think we can get over the iniquities of the first past the post system, make it work for progressive politics, replace the Tories, and hopefully, and this is the real prize, get electoral reform and proportional representation. Isn't that worth working for?
Thanks very much. Now, I want to move on to several questions about specific policies, of which we've had very many. And I'd like to start off with a question on basic income, which is reflective of a number of questions we've had. This is from David, who says, are you concerned that the optics of giving money to the already well-off, even though it will be reclaimed later? What are your views on negative income tax as a better way to address this problem? So Ed, would you like to deal with that, please?
David, thank you very much for this question. The basic income concept is something I've been working on as an economist in and out for nigh on 30 years. When I started work for the party as Paddy's economics advisor, it was the first task he set me. And I developed the policy we then called citizens' income, which had some of the issues that you're talking about, and we got over them. And let me explain. First of all, we talked about the people who it would really help, who needed that help. So the biggest group actually is carers, unpaid carers, of which there are millions. And I've made it a big plank of my policy that we should be the caring party and be the voice of carers. And those millions of unpaid carers would be the biggest group benefiting from a basic income. There'll be other groups, homeless people in particular, who, for whatever reason, are able to engage with the benefit system. A number of other groups who have real problems, people escaping domestic violence, young people traveling around the country. These are groups who would really benefit from a universal basic income. And that's really why I support it. It helps the most vulnerable and these unpaid carers. But you're right, there will be some people who aren't working, who are partners of people who are working, who are on high incomes. And sometimes people are worried about that. And that's why some people, like you're doing now, David, have put forward a negative income tax. The only issue with negative income tax, it doesn't really get around the problem because we have independent taxation. You know, you're now taxed not on your joint income as a household, you're taxed individually. So it doesn't really get around that problem fundamentally. It will for some, that's true, because they may have other incomes that they share and that they have to put on their tax return, but it won't get around many of those issues. And you know, you talk about the optics. I don't think there's that many people. You're right, the money will be clawed back. So I don't see it as a problem. And setting aside that optics, about those optics of helping those millions of unpaid carers, the homeless people, people who are very vulnerable, I'm very happy to make that argument as leader. If the party decides to go down this route, I've advocated for it. I've done the sums. I've made a proposal this week about how we could pay for it. I could talk about that later, Dave, if you like. Idea of a sovereign wealth fund using the money that we have lent to businesses, many of whom will not be able to pay them back. And one way is swapping their debt for equity. So we as a country have shares in those businesses, and that produces a dividend in the sovereign wealth fund to pay for the basic income in the future. So, you know, I think I've got some really detailed ideas about how we take this forward, as well as how we'd sell it politically. And I'm less worried about the problem that you put forward, David.
Thanks very much, Leila.
Thanks for your question, David. I approach this as someone who actually was brought on board this particular policy by campaigners in Hull initially, who were getting the council to consider it as a pilot, and then also working with people in Sheffield to actually look at how this would help their local communities, how this would remove some of the stigma of welfare. There have been studies that were done, and particularly in Finland, that have shown that actually it helps with well-being. It helps people feel much more resilient financially. And as a result, they end up being less anxious. They are actually far more likely to then go on and do extra study and then improve their lives. And what is more than anything else, what I love about this is that it is such a brilliant way of communicating what we stand for as a party. You know, this is a way of explaining that we care deeply about inequality and we care deeply about the most vulnerable. But I've totally come on board it now, not in terms of a pilot, as something that we really ought to try as a country because of coronavirus. Because on the day that we went into lockdown, my post bag tripled in size, and it was full of people concerned about losing their jobs. Some of them already had. They couldn't put basic meals on the table. The food banks have exploded with the number of people that are using them. There are children going to bed hungry at night tonight. And that surely cannot be right. And with the turmoil that's coming economically as a result of coronavirus, but also because of Brexit and a potential no deal Brexit, we have to find a way of not letting people fall through the cracks. So how do we afford it? Well, how do we afford not to? How can we have it on our conscience that the very, very poorest aren't being looked after? And that's the basic principle. And then we move on to the how do you pay for it. And I accept what you say about the optics. And I think there is a conversation to be had with those where we explain that it is part of a wider package. But I think it's right that as a leader and as a leadership contender, I lay out the basic principles by which we should campaign. And there's then a motion coming to conference so that we can flesh out these details. Is it a negative income tax? Is it a much more progressive taxation system is absolutely what I want. How does that translate to people on the ground? Well, yes, it would be clawed back. And actually those people at the top of the tree, if you like, actually are going to end up paying more. And that's absolutely right. It might be land value taxation. It might be other ways that we look at clawing back that money. And we have to have fully costed manifestos, something I know that Dick truly agrees with. Whenever we were in manifesto groups, that was the point he made every single time. It has to be fully costed. There's a reason why The Economist endorsed us in the last 2 elections. We have to remain fiscally responsible, but we can have policies that demonstrate our values like a UBI, and also have fully costed policies that the party helps to create that then make sure that we are credible with those policies too. The two will go hand in hand. And I genuinely think that that is the right way forward for our country, especially now.
Thanks very much. Now, this is a real challenge to answer this question briefly with specific responses. it is one of the most important questions that we face. It comes from Elizabeth, and she says, how are we going to tackle racism? So Layla, I'm afraid it's still you.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I mean, it's clear to me that we should start with stating the obvious, which is that we haven't tackled racism in this country. And actually, I'd go slightly further. I would say not only have we not tackled it as a country, we also haven't tackled it as a party. There is still discrimination that happens in our party all the time. Let's start with society, though. We've seen through coronavirus, BME communities are far more likely to be linked to deaths because of being on the front line, because of genetic factors, because also there has been a lack of care taken to respect their cultures. And I was hearing in evidence that we were taking as part of the inquiry this week, how one of the suggestions for why disproportionately it was Black and minority ethnic doctors and nurses that were dying as a result of coronavirus. Partly it was because they didn't have the right protective equipment. And some were facing the challenge of either go into work, but I'll have to shave my beard in order to do my job, or I face extra risk. And you should never have that. That's just a tiny example. The Black Lives Matter movement has really unveiled how terrible this is. But if we don't start by tackling it in our own party, then how can we speak on these issues with any kind of credibility? And whilst I have a diverse background, and so does Munira Wilson, that's the parliamentary party. The thing that I want to do is for us to be a party that is truly representative of the whole of the country. And the reason we want to do that is so that we can make better policy, so that we can have people in the room who truly understand these issues, so that we can be at the forefront of them. And yet too many local parties are disproportionately middle class, male, white, and we have to change this. So the target I set is actually one that I hope all local parties will adopt of their own accord. And it answers a simple question. Do you, as a party, represent the communities that you hope to serve? It's very simple. And if the answer is no, if you are a local party in an area that does have a large Hindu population, for example, when was the last time that you went and actively campaigned with them? And we're doing this in Oxford, West Abingdon. I went to go help out in a food bank with my local Hindu community, and I was recruiting as I went, making sure that I asked the question, come and join us, come and be part of what we're trying to do. There's so much that we have in common. Let's increase the diversity of our own party. Let's make sure that there's training, valuing everyone training, unconscious bias training coming from HQ to help local parties do that. But unless we change as a party, then how can we speak credibly to change as a country?
Thanks, Layla. Ed?
Racism is a scourge in the UK. It's a scourge across the world. And Liberals here and around the world need to be at the forefront of campaigning against racism. That means not just legislation, people's minds, but it means people's hearts. And that's a tall order. It's an order which will continue to be with us. This work won't ever be completed. And that's why we need to always be on it. I started campaigning before I joined the party. I campaigned against my college who had invested in Barclays, who invested in apartheid South Africa. And I got them to disinvest leading that campaign. And from that campaign on, I've always been inspired by the need for Liberal Democrats to stand up for equality and diversity the whole way. And the Black Lives Matter movement has just been a wake-up call. And it's a wake-up call which goes into the criminal justice system, of course, but beyond. It's one of the reasons in the criminal justice system, when I had the chance, I asked a question to the Prime Minister about the racist stop and search powers. In ordinary stop and search powers, you're 9 times more likely to be stopped if you're a black person than if you're a white person. Under Section 60 stop and search powers, which is a subset of the powers, you're 47 times more likely to be stopped as a black person than a white person. And I pressed the Prime Minister on that, and he said he wasn't going to change it. So we need to get this government and sort this government out, because this government is supporting racist policies in the criminal justice system. But we need to go further in education and health. I think the impact of COVID on Black and ethnic minority communities really needs to be examined in detail. We need to make sure justice is seen to be done there too. And we need to get our own house in order. We've made some progress on gender balance. Still need to do more. We can't be complacent. But we've got a poor record on Black and ethnic minority representation. And I've seen and heard people who have experienced racism in our party. So we have no room for complacency. In my own local constituency, I represent the most diverse of any constituency we currently hold. We have a large Hindu population mainly from the Gujarat, but also Tamils from Sri Lanka. We have a large Muslim population, mainly from Pakistan, but also from Iraq, Iran, Syria now. We have a Sikh population, mainly from East Africa, but also from Afghanistan, and a number of other populations. And I've been working with them for 20 years. And I help the Sikh population set up a Gurdwara. And I'm a regular visitor to the mosque and to the number of schools they have teaching their cultures and language on Saturdays across my borough. And the way I've worked with them is I've reached out to them. I've gone to where they are. I've encouraged them to join our party. I've encouraged them to join and stand for council. We have one of the highest proportions of BAME populations as a membership of our party than any other party in the country. We have 8 out of our 38 councillors from BAME backgrounds. And that's happened because I and 1 or 2 others have gone out of our way to go to that community, champion them, to befriend them and encourage them. And as leader, I would see that as my job too, obviously working across the party, but this is a passion of mine. I would lead it with my heart and my soul from day one, because we have to turn this around. We have to look like modern Britain, then we can represent modern Britain, we can win better, and we can turn around some of the racist policies the Tories don't want to sort out.
Thanks very much. We're running out of time, but there's time if our candidates can be quick for one final question before we do the sum-ups, and it's our first foreign policy question, and it's from Nicholas, who says, should we take a tougher stance with China? Ed?
Yes.
Thank you. Layla?
Okay, all right.
Yes. Do you want us to go on?
Well, why don't you do 2 more sentences, and then I'll give Ed 2 more sentences,
Sure.
and then we'll just have time for the wrap up.
Yes, for so many reasons. Human rights abuses are, of course, way up there. All credit to the campaign that Alistair Carmichael actually started in this country, recognizing what's happening to the Uyghurs. But actually, China has been for some time becoming increasingly authoritarian. And as a nation, our job is to make sure that whatever we may do, and I don't think we can cut off ties with China completely. They are a big trading partner. We would start to notice it in, prices of things that we're buying on the streets, things that we need. We absolutely need to have a relationship with them, but it shouldn't be necessarily a laissez-faire relationship. We are a G7 country. We do have power to be able to decide how we engage with them. And whatever we do, I'll just end with this, has to be done in concert with our international partners. It's one of the reasons why, obviously, we wanted to stop the the Brexit and start leaving the European Union, because working with them was so powerful. China doesn't really listen to just us. It was us as part of a big economic bloc. They understood the power of our spending money. But nevertheless, we have to work as close as we can in Europe, as close as we can in the UN, to challenge China on both human rights, but also, of course, security.
Thanks very much, Ed. I'm going to ask you for a couple of sentences, and then I'm going to ask you to segue, if you could, into your final couple of minutes.
I'll try. I've negotiated with the Chinese at the United Nations on climate change. They're tough, but we've got to make sure we're hard on them on climate change, just as we should be hard on them on human rights, whether it's the Uyghurs, Hong Kong, or elsewhere. But we also need to wake up. There is a massive geopolitical battle happening between the United States and China. And now President Xi Jinping has made himself lifetime leader. All the previous Chinese presidents weren't. He's made himself lifetime leader. I think that is quite an aggressive action internally and externally for China. And we need to think very, very hard about how we engage them, because this is the geopolitical question of our generation, of the future. And I want to tackle it for the party and get that debate going, so we are realistic about where China is in the world.
Thanks very much.
Shall I now?
Yes, could you? I'm giving the two candidates a final couple of minutes. I'm sorry we can't extend it, but I know that they've got other engagements before the evening's out with tight schedules to meet. So I'm afraid we are, despite our late start.
Because I'm a gentleman, actually it's Layla's turn to go first. I don't mind going first, but it is actually her turn to go first if she wants to.
As you wish. Go for it.
Okay, Layla.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dick. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. Now more than ever, we need a strong Liberal vision to challenge the Conservatives in Westminster, but also Labour bosses locally, and move our country forward. Ending childhood inequalities through early years education, tackling poverty through a universal basic income, fighting for our planet's future by investing in a green economic recovery, and of course, bringing decision-making closer to people by radically decentralising power from Westminster. But to do any of this, to change our country, we have to change too as a party. We've got to build our strength and push forward from the mistakes of the past. Steady as she goes doesn't cut it anymore. We need to turn around our single figure polling in order to win places like Sheffield, Hallam and Harrogate, but also to build in places like Barnsley and Rotherham and Calderdale and Bradford. We have to have a strategy that works for every part of the country, no matter what type of seat you might be in. And with the right strategy, message and leader, I know that we can do better. We can rebuild our council base and become a stronger political force. And my campaigning vision on education, the environment and the economy is already getting serious cut through in every part of the UK. We need to rebuild trust again so that we can start winning again. Because when you win, you get Lib Dems. And when you get Lib Dems get stuff done. We need to reinvigorate our party, to listen more to our campaigners all across the UK, but also to listen more to voters. We need to hold the government to account and get rid of Boris Johnson. We need a leader who can inspire people to get involved and get out and campaign. I am that leader. So in this leadership election, if you haven't yet cast your vote, please vote for me and let's move forward together. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ed.
Thank you all for your questions, and thanks to Dick for chairing. I hope tonight I've shown you that I have the vision, experience and judgment to lead the Liberal Democrats. Together, we must tackle the huge challenges we face across our country and inside the Liberal Democrats. I want to work with you to build an economy where we invest in green jobs, build a fairer society by investing in education, and give carers a much better deal. The Thornhill review of the general election shows us there's no quick fix to our party's challenges, but I know that by building firm foundations, we can shape a message and a party machine that can speak to every region across England again. I've been touched by how many great campaigners in Yorkshire and the Humber are backing my campaign. Shafak Mohammed, the leader of our group on Sheffield City Council, and our brilliant former MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber. Hannah Kitching, the leader of our Barnsley Council group, and the PPC for Penistone and Stockbridge. Cameron Hussain, our PPC for Leeds North West. Keith Aston, the leader of York Council. Judith Rogerson, our PPC for Harrogate and Knaresborough. Paul Scriven, the former leader of Sheffield City Council. Mike Ross, leader of our amazing group on Hull City Council. I'm grateful for all their support. And I want to campaign in Yorkshire and the Humber, and I want to campaign our socks off to elect more Liberal Democrat councillors, win more councils, and elect more Liberal Democrat MPs. As leader, I will build the Liberal Democrats as a strong, independent party, true to our liberal principles. Yes, I want to defeat this awful Tory government. And yes, I'd consider informal understandings with Labour to do that. But I will keep the Labour Party at arm's length. No pacts, no joint campaigning forces. In many places, people still need us to take on Labour too. So please join the likes of Shirley Williams and Daisy Cooper and back me as leader to lead winning campaigns for a greener, fairer, more caring country. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, the pair of you have had a very dramatic effect on the weather in this part of Yorkshire. When you started, it was balmy and pleasant. We now have a thunderstorm and torrential rain. So I don't know whether this shows that you're capable of shifting the political weather as quickly. But thanks very much. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Cheers.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
everybody.
everybody. Thank you very, very much.
Take care.